Hi, welcome to Asia in Review at Think Tech Hawaii, coming to you from Pioneer Plaza at downtown Honolulu. I'm your host, Hong Jiang, Associate Professor of Geography from UH Manoa, that is a University of Hawaii and Manoa. And my guest today is also from the same university, Dr. Dongfeng Xu, who is a visiting professor from University of Hawaii and Manoa. And today's topic is a timely one. It's about Christianity in China. And Dr. Xu is an expert in the history and changes of Christianity in China. He received his PhD in comparative literature from University of Chicago in 2011. And his research interests includes traditional Chinese literature, Confucian thought, and comparative studies of cross-cultural exchanges between China and the West. And Dr. Xu, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
So Christianity in China, this is a timely topic because, you know, Christmas is coming up.
Oh, yes, yeah. That's true.
We want to, especially talking about Christmas and Christianity in China. You know, we all know China is not traditionally a kind of a Christian country, and there are a lot of Christians there. So today's topic discussion, we're going to focus more on the earlier history of Christianity in China and how the early missionaries were interacting with the Chinese and trying to convert people, apparently successful to a large degree. But we want to start with the current situation in China. You know, how many, do we have a number or sense? I know it's hard to get. How many Christians do we have in China?
Well, that's a very interesting question because the number of Christians in China today, there are some statistics, but we have to be very careful with that because the registered Christians registered with the Christian Church, I mean, under the committee of Christianity in China. There are about 23 million registered Protestant believers, and about 6 million, according to the statistics, Catholic believers. But the actual number, according to some scholars, should be a lot more than that because there are house churches and some Christians, they are not registered.
Talking about house churches, we actually hear more about the house churches because the house church members somehow are not liked by the Chinese Communist government, and the government has been suppressing them, arresting them, torturing them, put them to jails and labor camps. So how would you say Chinese government policy toward you know, Christians or religious policy in general?
Well, you see, here we have to distinguish the published policy and the actual practice. First, we have to say, Professor Jiang, that throughout history, Chinese governments has always had this intention to control religious practice in China. And so with Christianity in China, it has, well, let's just talk about the People's Republic of China. And they, in the 1954 Constitution, it's very clearly declared that there is freedom for religious belief, freedom of, you know, different kind of freedoms, but including freedom of religion. But the problem with the practicing of Christianity in China, they do have this governments not supported, but governments recognized, let's say, committee of Christianity.
Is that what you mean by, like, China has this Chinese Patriotic Catholic Association?
Catholic,
is that
yeah, and also there is this three self, you know, patriotic, you know, committee of three. So, three self means what? Self-run, self-supporting, and
kind of self-discipline, right?
Sort of, yeah. Well, I mean, the last self is about preaching by themselves. They don't allow foreign missionaries.
Okay,
I mean, at least they don't support those people to come. So this kind of so the policy is freedom, but the actual control from the government may be a little bit different, and they do support these committees. Actually, you can see sometimes they even say the clergy men in the committee, they are actually government officials. And so
Communist Party members?
Maybe not, but their practice is all right. But the so-called home church or house church, or the private Bible study groups, then that depends. Small group may be all right, but when you are large enough, it depends on what the government see, how they see you. Yeah.
Let me try to understand. So you have these churches that's kind of supported by the government. That's Three Selves Church, the Patriotic Church, Catholic Association,
and the China Christian Council.
So these are the organizations that basically
recognized
the leadership of the Communist Party, basically, right?
It's called patriotic. Like you have to be.
That's right. Yeah,
I don't know if they declare that they love the party, but they have, at least they declare the love of the nation or the country.
So then they would they would have to accept the bishops selected by the government, basically.
The governments usually do not do that, but in 2005 they tried to against the view of Vatican, they tried to appoint someone. It happened.
So that's the one on one side. Those churches that are more kind of on the short leash of the government.
You can say they have to go along.
Go along with what government is saying.
You can.
And then the outcast is the home church.
Those, they are, in Chinese they are called underground, churches. So house churches or home church, they practice private practice, so it's a little bit different.
Okay. Yeah. And do you know if those house churches, are they mostly Catholics or Protestants, or could be both?
It could be both, but I assume that the larger number of Christians in China are Protestants. So I would assume they are mostly Protestants. But it should be. We just want to give people, our viewers, some basic background about Christianity in China right now, because like I said, our program today is focusing more on the early history of how Christians got to China in the first place, and how come we have so many Christians in China. So let's get back to the very beginning. When did the Christians first arrive in China? This
is in your your field of study.
I did touch on this topic. The earliest Christians, there are some disagreements. There is because some scholars, they believe there recently published books arguing the Christians or Christianity started to arrive in China in Han Dynasty. And because in early 1980s, they found some bas-relief sculptures, which were obviously not Buddhist artwork, but indicating very clearly Christian images. But that kind of argument is not really the most accepted one. And the very clear and sure record of the first arrival of Christians in China was in early Tang Dynasty. To be exact, because it's recorded in the history of Tang Dynasty, it's 635.
Oh,
635.
I see.
Because this missionary by the name of Aloben was sent by this Church of the East, representing a group of what we can call heretic, Christians, called Nestorians. They arrived in China, and they started to preach, have their missionary work in China, and they got very popular in Tang already. And in about 130, 50 years, they got very popular. They set up lots of churches and got lots of followers. But in the 9th century, mid-9th century, when the Wuzong Emperor of Tang started to have his persecution of Buddhists, I think the Nestorian Church suffered some setback. So it started to disappear in China. But Nestorian missionaries continued to come to China throughout the centuries, even in Yuan Dynasty.
I see.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they had their
1200s.
they had their appearance in China, presence.
What's interesting about the Tang Dynasty, the Tang Dynasty is actually one of the most open dynasties in the Chinese history. We talk about the capital of Tang Dynasty, Chang'an, to be the capital city of the world, basically. It's a world city. A lot of people go to Chang'an from different parts of the world, and the dynasty in general, in most part, was very open in terms of allowing the Buddhists to develop there. And here you're talking about also Christianity, so it's a very kind of multiplicity of beliefs were allowed.
Yes.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. At that time, Chang'an is almost like today's New York City.
That's exactly.
Like all kinds of people were there: foreigners, students, missionaries, merchants, diplomats. All kinds of people, you name it, and there was this interaction between Chinese culture and foreign culture. And that's the most active time.
That's an interesting
history,
time.
Early history. Yes.
If I had a choice of a time travel back to China to any time, that's probably the place I want to go to.
Tang is well, most glorious time in Chinese history.
That's right. Yeah. So we're going to take a short break, and then we'll get to. I understand the growth of Christianity had a little bit of a setback until it flourished again during the late Qing dynasty.
Late Ming
Dynasty. Sorry. So we're going to get to late Ming after the break. So this is Asia in Review at Think Tech Hawaii, and I'm your host Hong Jiang, and we've been talking about Christianity in China. We'll take a short break and we'll be right back.
We want to thank our underwriters.
Hawaiian Electric Company and its affiliates Maui Electric on Maui and Hawaii Electric Light Company on Hawaii Island are deeply committed to the communities they serve.
Galen Ho is a senior executive of BAE Systems, a global defense, security, and aerospace company.
The High-Tech Development Corporation, the state's leading technology agency, attached to the Department of Business, Economic Development, and Tourism.
Castle and Cook Hawaii, with a time-honored legacy that spans more than 160 years and revolves around its mission of investing in Hawaii, creating communities, and providing for the needs of our state.
Hawaii Gas, formerly the Gas Company, a proponent of the Liquefied Natural Gas Initiative, helping Hawaii achieve its transition to clean energy and a better energy future.
Collateral Analytics, a Hawaii-based tech company empowering the real estate industry with greater and faster access to the tools and data they need to make better informed property investment decisions.
I'm Nicole Horry. Thanks so much for joining us on Think Tech.
I'm Maria Kashem. See you next time.
Hi, we're back. We're live, coming to you from downtown Honolulu at Pioneer Plaza. And I'm your host, Hong Jiang, at Asia in Review at Think Tech Hawaii. And we'll be speaking with Dr. Dongfeng Xu about Christianity in China. So right before the break, we'll just end it at the first wave of Christianity in China in the Tang Dynasty around 634 and after. And then, so was it like at the late Ming Dynasty, which would be around what time? 1500s, that you have another round of missionaries going to China again and expanding their influence?
Yeah, late 1500s.
Late 1500s.
About Wan Li, Wan Li's reign, so 1580 something. Well, Matteo Ricci, the most famous missionary by the Chinese name Li Madou, arrived in China in 1582. So that was about time. He was not the very first, of course. To
He's
arrive
definitely very famous,
very famous, but he was one of the first. And actually, the first Jesuits arrived in China was Xavier, Francis Xavier. He arrived in China in 1550 something, but he never could enter China. He died there shortly after at the small island on the small island of some illness. So he didn't really get into China.
In terms of the Jesuits going to China, this is a so the idea is that they are going to spread Christianity and convert the Chinese people into Christians.
Yes.
How did they enter into the Chinese society? How did they get there? How did they enter? You know, the Chinese society was a very different one, different language, different culture.
Yes. Well, this is a little complicated and long story, so let me just very, very quickly go into the background of the Jesuits. I mean, Society of Jesus, that's the order, the name of the order. And this is the Jesuits' mission to China, actually to the rest elsewhere in the world, was a mission undertaken by them in the post-Reformation Europe. And at that time, the church was separated, and actually the separation of the church was already final. So the Jesuits saw that. Actually, before they set up their order, they were a group of very devoted Catholics, and they saw the church was going to be separated, and they were not very happy with that. So there was this movement we know called Counter-Reformation. So the Catholic had this kind of movement, and so this group of Catholic Christians, led by someone called Ignatius of Loyola, they set up the Society of Jesus, and they are the aim of this order was to spread Christianity elsewhere in the world, because Europe was already, divided, and you have Protestants there already. So they had this purpose in their mind, and also they set up schools to train their people, the Jesuits, to be very good missionaries, and so they then they started to send them out.
Are they also trained in other things like science and math?
Definitely. Actually, they were trained in different subjects, including science and math, and even fine arts, music, and humanities like classical literature.
It's almost like they were trained like the traditional Chinese scholars, right?
Yes.
In many different areas with a great amount of knowledge, general knowledge about the society, the arts, and everything.
Definitely, yeah. Because they were very good missionaries in the sense that they were very trained, students, very well trained students of science and technology available, at the time, and also they were well versed in classical literature, particularly Roman literature and Latin, and they read lots of Cicero,
so when they get to China, they were connected with the higher upper class of the society, right?
Yes, but there is a small, change of ideas. before they came to China, they thought China was a Buddhist country. So when they came to China, what they did was they dress up like Buddhists.
Okay.
You know,
with a robe.
Yeah, and but very quickly, and to these well-trained people, you know, they realized Buddhist monks, you know, clergies in China, did not really have high social status, and so very soon they realized what they should do. They changed the Buddhist robe to the Confucian gowns, you know, like, and they started to learn Chinese. They started to read Confucian classics and started to mingle with Confucian scholars and particularly officials.
In the court.
Oh yeah, of course, because those people were Confucians, first of all, at least.
Right.
And so their policy was to convert from the above. So hoping because they saw the influence of Confucian doctrines in China as a state doctrine.
That's right.
So they thought if they could convince the Confucians that Christianity was the way to go for China, then they had this hope that.
Well, if you can get the emperor, then you can.
Oh yeah,
the whole country.
definitely. Yeah, like they can repeat the victory Christianity had with Constantine, you know, like
right,
back in the year 300 something. Yeah, so yeah.
So when they first got to China, they tried to basically, you know, connect with the upper class in the society, the officials.
Yeah.
Were they getting into preaching immediately, or were they doing something else to try to gain trust? They didn't get into preaching immediately. Well, at least they didn't devote all their time and effort to preaching at first, because they could see from what they saw in China, the Confucians were very convinced of their, you know, cultural supremacy of their own teaching. So they didn't want to have a head-on confrontation with the Confucians. So what they tried to do was, besides befriending the Confucian officials, writing about, you know, the concept of friendship in the West, trying to present them, you know, how the people in the West make friends, and they try to influence the Chinese with their own literature. They translated, you know, Roman literary works, you know, into Chinese, and also they try to use their technology and science to impress the Chinese. Well, for instance, they made the first world map, you know, for the Chinese, not just to teach Chinese modern knowledge of geography, but just to tell them, to interest them, you know, and also, of course, to tell them the idea of how our world is understood in modern time. Yeah. Can you give some examples of how these Jesuits influence the Chinese society?
Yeah, there are many examples. Let's just take this world map as an example. I think this map is just an eye-opening thing to the Chinese. Of course, Chinese liked it because they saw a different idea about how the world was looked at, was understood by others. Because we know Chinese had their own ideas about what heaven and earth are like. And they usually think, in general, at that time, people thought the world was square. And also for the Chinese, for a very long time, China was the center of the world. They thought, you know, like the world was just as big as China was, and there was no outside. And a few countries outside China were like formed this kind of fiefdom relation with China. So they were not really neighbors. They were part of China. And so suddenly they saw this very different representation of the world. The world was not flat; it was a globe, and also China was not really the center of the world, and it was not as big as the world. It was only a small part of the world. So this gave them quite a shock, despite the fact that they enjoyed having this world map. But this world map, if we really look into that, it was like a map presented to the Chinese host by these strangers, missionaries, foreigners from outside. But they kind of make the Chinese some kind of guest, a new arrival, a newcomer to this world family, where there are a lot more countries than the Chinese ever knew.
Yeah. But what's interesting is that if you look at the Ming Dynasty, we do have like a Zhenghe sailed to many countries. So it almost like it become a time of expanding knowledge about the world, in the sense that both the Zhenghe went out to different countries, and also the world map brought to China. It kind of gave the Chinese a similar sense of a larger world. China is no longer centered anymore. What about the other area of science and technology? Math. I know
math,
the Jesuits were good in terms of math. I understand the Jesuits helped the Chinese in terms of correcting the calendar. Was that part of it?
Oh, yeah. That was a very, very important event in China, because by the end of Ming Dynasty, the Chinese calendar was not very accurate anymore, and it needs reform. Unfortunately, at the time, the Chinese didn't have enough knowledge of math to really do that. Because the calendar was almost 300 years old by that time. They inherited it from the Yuan Dynasty. And they have been doing small, some minor reforms, calculation, real calculation, rectification. But at the time of late Ming, they had to do an overall, rectification reform, and they couldn't do that. And the calendar in China has been very, very important, with China being an agriculture country. That's the first of all. You need the accurate calendar to know the right time to spread your seed, to plow the field, right, for farmers. And also, calendar has its political significance. It has, marks the dates when the emperor or the officials have to go to worship, to offer sacrifice to heaven and to earth and things like that. So if the calendar is not accurate, you can't perform this kind of religious and also administrative functions properly. So you need that, and also to predict, some abnormal natural phenomena is also very important, like eclipse. Because for the Chinese, they believe the integration of heaven and man, and the one sign of integration is when something happens in natural world, it indicates the heaven is sending you some message you have to follow. I mean, if something disastrous happens or eclipse happens, it means you are not running the country correctly. So the emperor at this kind of time is supposed to issue some kind of self-damnation memorials, to say I have not been doing things correctly. But if you can't predict that,
caught the emperor by surprise, right?
it's even more serious problem. So they need that, and eventually they had to go to the missionaries to get help. And the reason this is very, very significant and important and deserves our study nowadays is
that's interesting.
Chinese calendar was controlled by the government. Individuals cannot touch it because to control the calendar means to control the channel or the communication between man and heaven. Only the emperor has the privilege.
And what's interesting is that these Jesuits actually were in the role of helping the court, helping the emperor to change or correct the calendar. That means that their role is actually pretty high, at least in this respect, in the court. So we're going to have to take a short break. This is Asia in Review at Think Tech Hawaii, and we've been speaking with Dr. Xu about Christianity in China. We'll take a short break and we'll be right back.
Aloha, I'm Nicole Hori for Think Tech. For nearly half a century, the Hawaii Foreign Trade Zone No. 9 has brought the benefits of the Foreign Trade Zone program to Hawaii businesses and entrepreneurs. DBET, the Department of Business, Economic Development and Tourism, operates Hawaii's Foreign Trade Zone program to encourage international business and economic development. The Foreign Trade Zone's mission is to increase the amount of international trading activity in Hawaii, thereby providing employment opportunities for the residents of our island state. For more information, see ftz9.org. I'm Nicole Hori. Mahalo.
We're back. We're live, coming to you from downtown Honolulu. This is Think Tech Hawaii, and I'm your host, Hong Jiang, at Asia in Review. We'll be speaking with Dr. Dongfeng Xu about Christianity in China, a timely topic. So before the break, we were just talking about, this is a fascinating in terms of the foreign Jesuits in China aiming to spread Christianity, but they got really high positions in the court because they were helping the court to change, rectify the important calendar. And that's something the emperor would have a control over. So in other words, they were well respected in the Chinese society then, right?
Yes, among certain groups, of course. Okay. There are different kind of Confucians towards the Jesuits. There are some who got converted, like the famous Xu Guangqi and Yang Tingyun. They were the first Christians in China converted by the Jesuits. And there are some who were interested in the Jesuit science and technology, but not in their religion or religious teaching. So there are this.
So they basically became good friends, but not. I'm not going to follow your belief.
The Chinese at the time had this practical need, as we mentioned just already when we were talking about calendar. They needed the reform of the calendar for the government to function properly, and so they saw the usefulness of the science the Jesuit had, but they knew once they accept the religious teachings, the doctrines of Christianity, there will be a problem for Confucian teaching.
That's right.
There will be they will be in conflict. Who will be the host? Who will be the guest? Right?
That's right.
Who will be the hierarchy? How do you arrange that? So they had trouble. So they say science and technology from the West are useful, but we still have to have our Chinese base. The kind of Chinese base and foreign function debate in late Qing time actually started in late Ming already. Because when you have this, both science and religion together, you have to make a choice for those people. So there are also those who are indifferent towards the Chinese, towards the Jesuits. And also there are those who are very hostile to them.
I see. So
basically four groups.
Fortunate ones were working with the court, and they get well treated, and other people were not necessarily in the court to spread their influence.
Yeah. Well, the Jesuits, they were limited, of course, and they were doing their work whenever they had a chance. But the Jesuits had a clear understanding from the beginning that their work should start with science and technology, not with religion. So that's the limit.
I wanted to ask you this question. Chinese society, Confucianism has been basically the founding philosophy for the government and for the Chinese people.
State doctrine, yes.
That's right.
Yeah.
Do either side see the conflict there between Christianity and Confucianism, and you mentioned a little bit about the conflicts there.
The conflicts, for some Confucians, particularly those who are hostile to the missionaries, they did see that. And but for those like Xu Guangqi, those converted to Christianity, they said Christianity can supplement Confucian and help Confucians, how do you say, reject Buddhism. Because,
I see.
It's not just the conflict between Confucianism and Christianity in China at the time or throughout history. In China, these three religions, what we call teachings, Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism, they were always in conflict. Sometimes they get together, but for most of the time they have trouble. They find each other the trouble. So for Xu Guangqi, he would say, Christianity can supplement Confucianism and help Confucianism reject Buddhism.
So if you take this view of a complementary kind of view, it becomes easier to see the spreading of Christianity in China. And I was just checking on Matteo Ricci, which is one of the famous Jesuits in China. And he wrote a book called The True Meaning of the Lord of Heaven. And basically he was looking at the similarities between Christianity and Confucianism, which is really, really interesting aspect. They're talking about kind of cultural communication and assimilation and mutual influence there. Can you tell us more about Matteo Ricci?
Oh, yeah. And
the famous one.
Very. Well, basically, he's an Italian Jesuit. He entered the order when he was young, and he came to China, as we mentioned, in 1582, and he stayed in China until his death for about 27, 28 years, depending on how we count that. And he died in 1610, and it took him about 20 years from the border town in Canton, in Guangzhou, to move up to Beijing, because he was guided by this policy convert from the above. He thought he had to go to Beijing to where the action was to start working. So it took him 20 years to get there. But in the last 9 or so years of his life, he stayed in Beijing, and he was allowed actually by Emperor Wanli to stay in Beijing, and eventually he was allowed to be buried in Beijing. His tomb is still in Beijing now. And he was very, very influential in many different ways. Just now we mentioned the world map. He made that. And he made, actually, it is said that one of the reasons he was allowed to stay in Beijing was he offered a copy of that map to Wanli Emperor, and also together with some clocks which he made.
So I know how versatile he was. That's right.
And it is said that Wanli Emperor made this kind of special permission for him to stay in Beijing, because he said if the clocks go wrong, he can come in to repair them.
You have to allow him to stay.
So this is the kind of small things they offer, and then they think that would lead to bigger things like Christianity or Christianization of China. And to come back to the Confucianism and Christianity, the relation between these two, Matteo Ricci was the first one to visualize and also to practice the so-called policy of accommodation. So he decided to avoid head-on confrontation with Confucianism, and specifically, he didn't want to name Confucianism as a pagan teaching, because if it was a pagan teaching, you have to really fight it.
I see.
And he was saying well, it's very complicated, his theory, but basically he was arguing that Confucianism was not a religion, and it was just a school of teaching philosophy. Confucius himself was just a master teacher. So by some argument nowadays in the West, up to quite recently, the view about Confucianism was that Confucianism was not a religion, was because they can trace that back to the origin was Ricci. They say.
Interesting. All the way till today, there's still some influence over here.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. So we're going to take the last short break. This is Asia in Review at Think Tech Hawaii, and I'm your host Hong Jiang. We'll be discussing Christianity in China. We'll be right back after this short break.
Aloha. I'm Jay Fidel for Think Tech. For nearly half a century, the Hawaiian Foreign Trade Zone, number 9, has brought the benefits of the Foreign Trade Zone program to Hawaii businesses and entrepreneurs. DBED, the Hawaii Department of Business, Economic Development and Tourism, operates Hawaii's Foreign Trade Zone program. It does so to encourage international business and economic development. The Foreign Trade Zone mission is to increase the amount of international trading activity in Hawaii, thereby providing employment opportunities for the residents of our island state. For more information, see ftz9.org. I'm Jay Fidel of Think Tech. Mahalo.
Hi, we're back. We're live, coming to you from Pioneer Plaza at downtown Honolulu. And this is Think Tech Hawaii. I'm your host, Hong Jiang, at Asia in Review, and we'll be discussing Christianity in China. So, talking about the Jesuits' influence in China and Matteo Ricci. So that was the late Ming time, and and then we moved to Qing. And I've read something about the Qing Dynasty. The Kangxi was one of the key the emperor in the Qing Dynasty, and he had the Jesuits as his advisors in the court, and the same thing that they gave him clocks, and he learned math and medicine from them.
Yes,
which is really interesting. And of course, he did not convert to Christianity.
No.
So the same story goes on there. Let's look at the other side. These Jesuits come in and bring science, technology, and Christianity and math, and help to correct the calendar, bring literature in. What do they bring back to Europe that would help the Europeans to know more about China?
Yes, well, that's a very, very important and interesting question, because the Jesuits were really the bridges between these two cultures. They brought European thoughts, European work, technology, science to China, and they also introduced Chinese culture back in Europe. Matteo Ricci translated different Confucian works into Latin for Europe. Of course, his book did not become very popular, of course, and later on, some people retranslated them, and those translations became very popular. And also, towards his death, Matteo Ricci wrote his so-called diary or memoir, which was brought back and translated into Latin. He wrote it in Italian and translated into Latin, and became a very, very popular book in Europe at the time. And you know that Robert Burton, the English scholar who wrote Anatomy of Melancholy, in his work, very influential book, in his book he mentions quite often, frequently, what the Chinese were doing. And his sources were Matteo Ricci's book and other Jesuits' letters. Because the Jesuits, we have to say, the Society of Jesus was founded as a military order. And it's all the members of the society were, follow very strict disciplines. And one requirement for them, for the missionaries, was they have to write letters regularly home to report their work and also what they see. So these letters became, once they were known, read by people in Europe, and got started to work as introduction, to Chinese culture to Europeans. And also because of, like the Jesuits, when they had to work in China, they had to learn Chinese language. They had to read Chinese works. And they started to study Chinese culture, including Chinese literature, Chinese religion, and religion was their concern, right? I mean, to understand how, what kind of religion the Chinese had, or how religious the Chinese were, and if, the religions were acceptable or rejectable, by their standard. So they started to talk about that, and because of that, sinology actually started, and a small thing we can mention today is we have romanization for Chinese, and in traditional Chinese philology, Chinese didn't really have romanization. We know that.
I remember reading the older
we have influenced by Sanskrit, by Buddhism. People had the so-called you have two words and you use the consonant of the first word and then the vowel of the second word, you try to spell out figure out the pronunciation of a certain word. And also there are other kinds of ways, like to put a word with the same pronunciation to mark what the pronunciation of a new word in the text. So, but these kind of instruction wouldn't work for the Jesuits. So for them to learn Chinese, they had to invent the spelling, using alphabets, whatever,
so
Latin. So the romanization actually
That's
started
right.
with that.
But
that's a small part. I mean, it's sinology today, study of Chinese religion and things. We can all trace back to.
That's very interesting. We're just about out of time, just 2 more minutes. But look like they are the forebears of globalization and cultural exchange between China and the West.
Definitely.
They played a very, very important role. Of course, they also created, converted people to Christians.
Converted some,
that's right.
But their influence is a lot more than that. By spreading science and technology, knowledge of this, and it's very profound and long-lasting. Long-lasting, yeah.
Well, again, we're really happy to have you here. Educate
We're
us
happy to
about
be
the spreading of Christianity in China. That's not just a religion, not just Christianity, but it's really about the larger aspects of cultural exchange and exchange of civilizations in a sense. Yeah, that's great. So we are out of time and we will need to wrap up. And I'm Hong Jiang. This is Asia in Review at Think Tech Hawaii. And we'll be speaking with Dr. Dongfeng Xu, visiting assistant professor from University of Hawaii at Manoa. And we've been talking about Christianity in China. Again, Christmas is coming up. And whether you are Christian or not, have a merry one. Merry Christmas to you all, and Happy New Year, Happy Holidays. And I want to thank our production manager, Ian Davidson, Communications Director, Chrissy Golfigan, and our producer, Jay Fidel, who magically puts everything together. And I want to thank you, our viewers, for tuning in. So I will see you again on Tuesdays at Asia in Review. Thank you and goodbye.